program at a later time on our AARP YouTube channel. So please click on it when it appears on your screen. If you're not familiar, AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people to choose how they live as they age. With nearly 38 million members, AARP works to strengthen communities and advocates for what matters most with a focus on health security, financial resilience, and social connection. Today's program focuses on financial resilience. So who's in the audience today? If you haven't already, please put your first name and what city you're zooming in from in the chat. Joyce, who's with us today? Who do you see in the audience?
Well, looking at all of these wonderful people, I see Ellen from San Francisco, and we have Darren from Alameda. We have Manchester, Connecticut, Oceanside, California, San Antonio, Glendale, San Francisco, Irvine, it goes on, Walnut Creek, Santa Barbara, Sacramento. Back to you, Jacqueline. They are coming in.
Oh, we're so glad. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Joyce. We are delighted to have all of you join us today, and we hope you have your tea or coffee or some other beverage with you. We're excited to share with you difficult conversations discussing money with your kids and grandkids. To get warmed up today, we have 2 poll questions and ask you to quickly submit your answers. Poll number 1, do you discuss money with your family? Yes or no? Oh, wow. A lot of people do discuss money. Let's see. About 67% say yes, they do discuss money. And about 33% say no, they don't discuss money. Well, you should get some good answers today. Our second poll, let's get this. We'll go over and ask and do our second poll. How comfortable are you with having money conversations with your family? Very comfortable, fairly comfortable, fairly uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. So please just click on the poll and answer. Oh, some of us don't see the poll. There we go. It's coming up now. Let's give it another second or two. It's almost kind of equal. Very comfortable, about 23%. Fairly comfortable, about 40%. Fairly uncomfortable, 36%. And very uncomfortable, about 2%. Well, hopefully after this program, you'll be very comfortable with it. Thank you for sharing in the poll. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Martin Booker and Mary Liz Burns. Martin Booker is a program manager at AARP, where he leads various financial education initiatives about investing, Social Security, and budgeting. Martin has a master's degree in social work from the University of Connecticut and is a certified financial planner. Prior to coming to AARP, he worked in the nonprofit sector in Washington, D.C., and developed a passion for helping people improve their money habits. Today, Martin offers individual and group coaching services and classes and leads workshops about credit, investing, retirement planning, and other finance-related topics. His goal is to engage and educate people to better understand how to not just make money, but keep their money. Good idea. Mary Liz Burns serves as Senior Communication Strategy Director at AARP and works with AARP's powerful channels to educate and engage millions of Americans on personal finance topics, including retirement decisions, maximizing Social Security, and managing debt. She is also the lead for Saving for Retirement campaign with AARP and the Ad Council. She has over 20 years of communications, marketing, media relations, and advocacy experience in the nonprofit arena at the state and national levels. Mary Liz is a certified financial behavior specialist, holds an MBA from Creighton University and a BA in speech communications psychology from Indiana University. She speaks with groups across the country on the topic of financial psychology and the need for financial education at any age. Okay, and per our tradition to add some spice to their introduction, fun facts about Mary Liz. Mary Liz's early career aspiration was to become a cast member of Saturday Night Live. Her husband is currently living in Ireland, studying at Queen's University on conflict transformation, and social justice. During a study on money conversation, the survey found that younger generations were more likely to have conversations about money growing up. Gen Z's about 74%, millennials 67% are more likely than Gen X's who are at 54%, or boomers who are only at 38% to say their finances were at least sometimes discussed in their household when they were growing up. Welcome, Martin and Mary Liz. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for everyone who's joining us here today. We are so excited to be here. Mary Liz, I'm so happy to have you.
I'm so glad to be here, Martin. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks to the whole group.
Yep, and just hearing about that from you, about your bio. This is the perfect conversation for you and I to have together. We get to just sit around and chat about money, have a fun conversation around finances. So we hope to just get everyone engaged. If you are, I see that the chat has been active and busy, so feel free to talk to us in the chat. We're going to do Q&A towards the end of this conversation. So load us up with questions if you think of questions, or if you have suggestions, conversation that you want to have, do that in the chat as well. So we love your feedback, and we love the energy and participation. So feel free to talk to us as we have this conversation. So we're, the title of this event is Difficult Conversations, discussing money with your children and grandchildren. But we know it's not always so difficult, right? It can be fun. It can be exciting as well. So we're going to kind of dive into all of that throughout this conversation. But Mary Liz, just quickly, hearing from your background, I like the idea you're a behavioral finance specialist. Like that's, or being certified in behavioral finance. That's really interesting. We didn't hear about that. I didn't hear about that as much in the past. It was always financial advisors or being certified as a planner and things like that. So just real quick, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about the behavioral finance side. How does that quite differ from the idea of financial planning? And while you're doing that, I'm gonna pull some visuals up while you talk so that people can kind of see what for the visual learners, I want to make sure that they have something to look at.
Thank you so much, Martin. And yes, I love talking about money, but let me first just say, all of us, give us a moment of grace, because money, especially for those fairly uncomfortable folks, but even if you said you're really comfortable, there's sometimes when just talking about money or thinking about your own money causes a lot of stress. So just give yourself some grace for a moment as we get into this conversation, and know that there's not one right way for everybody. Everybody's money is different. And what I love about behavioral finance is that sometimes financial planners and advisors, they learn these things about what to do, how much to invest, how much should you have in your budget? And then in the past, they've gone about and given you a plan and said, okay, here's how much you should save, $1 million. And then they wonder, why are people not coming back to them after they've given them the plan, and wondered well, what happened to them? I told them what to do. Why didn't they do it? And it's because, that second point, money is emotional. It's not just rational. Like when you get that debt bill, it's not like coming in the back of your brain where all the memory is and all that processing. It comes to the front of your brain and you're like, uh-oh, what am I going to do about that? And then you started thinking, well, maybe I could get a 0% transfer card. Then I'll transfer that balance on, and oh, I didn't pay that one off. And then I do something else. Like, it becomes very hard to sit down and rationally think, this is what I'm going to do with my money. It's an emotional process. And so, what financial and behavior specialists really focus on, things I'm studying, is that there are motivations that really get us going about finances, and biases that we have about money that come from birth, that come from watching your family, that comes from their family. And it's not just about knowing what to do, it's what are all those other things that go in to that relationship that we try to have with our money. And so financial psychology, behavioral finance, I'm excited because now financial planners have to take modules on financial psychology today to become a certified financial planner, because they know that you got to be able to talk to people about money. You got to know, like, what are the social, emotional, cultural factors that go in to why we do the things that we do about money, which sometimes surprise us, sometimes confound our parents. We don't know why somebody's doing it that way. There are reasons. And I think, Martin, we'll go into a little bit then, talking about some of those money scripts that I've been studying, and that are really apparent, that once folks see them, they're going to see some of those same biases that impact our decision making about money.
Yeah, that's like such a good point. I used to always say, when it comes to money and finance, it's more than math, right? Because we just think, oh, so I can count to it, right? It's like 1+1 is 2, right? We understand that, but 1+1 plus you, once you add all of you said biases, your upbringing, and all those other things, that 2 becomes, plus 200, or it could be -40, right? But because once we add ourselves into the money calculations, that's where things can get a little tricky. So I love that there's a focus on that, around behavioral finance. That's helpful. What do you say? So when we think about, just that difficulty around money conversations, why do you think there is so much difficulty?
I mean, Martin, you just said it. Like, it starts with also how we grew up. One question I like to ask folks is, what was your first money memory? Just think about that for a minute. Like, for me, my dad and mom came from nothing. And my dad built his own business. He was a really smart entrepreneur. He did very well for his family. And he would sometimes take out some of my friends who were like a little bit less, fortunate than we were. But he would
Mhm.
always say to me, do not tell other people we're doing okay. It was like, you don't talk about money. It's rude. Like, and I'm Gen X, so, rude, don't talk about it. Like, there's nobody's business. So when you
Mm.
think about those first money memories, and Martin, maybe later on you'll share what you can think of what your first was. Sometimes it's shame and fear. We're watching our family struggling, and it's like, you don't want to talk about money when you see mom and dad crying, or things
Mhm.
that are they're like screaming at each other because it's really about money.
Mhm.
Sometimes children are really told just to be silent, to be secret, and the problem is that secrecy is hurting us. It's hurting us not to talk about money, because sometimes it's also just the learning. Like, to me, money is a journey. Like, we don't have all the answers at birth, and we need to, like, think about these things and learn about them. The way we learn about things is about talking with others, reading with others, sharing with others. And I think understanding some of these, like, money scripts and things that I talked about a second ago are really
Mhm.
important. I think Martin was going to pull up a couple of those and see if any of these kind of resonate with you.
Yep.
And a lot of them, oh, go ahead. And a lot of them have to do with, like, that shame and that envy, and maybe you've got, like, a lot of impulsive behaviors and things. So if you look at these, I'll read through them real carefully, real quickly. These manuscripts come from some really great folks who've been doing this work for a lot of years. See if any of these resonate with you. These are not all of them. There's a bunch of scripts. Money will take care of itself. Don't need to worry about it. Or money should not be discussed, like what my parents kind of inadvertently said or overtly said to me. How about my parents or my partner will always take care of my financial needs? And that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later, talking about, what your family thinks about the assumptions. More money equals more happiness and security. Is that true? If people need something from me, it's selfish and mean to withhold it, especially money. Grandparents, I see you. Money money can bring problems. And sometimes just like, don't even talk about it. Because every time you got money, it's a problem. I don't deserve the money. That comes to a lot of that self-loathing and things. I got money, I need to give it away as quickly as possible. I don't need to hold on to it. I don't deserve it. Or maybe I deserve to spend money as much as I made. I can do whatever I want to with it. You know, credit cards be darned. Or there will never be enough money. And that scarcity model, you know, mindset's like, oh no, like, what am I going to do? I'm sure something up here may resonate with you. And if it resonates with you, your kids, your grandkids, other people may be observing that, and it kind of comes in for you as well.
These are really good. And I see a few people in the chat already putting down some of their first money memories from what you mentioned. I'd encourage you all, add some more money memories. These are good to just see how people first engage with money, or the first thing that they remember from engaging with money, from literally sitting down with the family and just reviewing bills, and getting that chance to just kind of see bills being paid, and and doing it as a family. That's pretty cool, right? To just that's learning responsibility at an early age, right? There's some people who, when a bill comes in, and this is something that I've noticed even amongst my generation, and I'm a millennial. One of the things that I'll see is I have friends who are afraid to open the mail because they'll see that there's so much anxiety around just the idea of opening it. So there's this avoided thing, right? It's like I avoid it because I'm avoiding what might be on the other side of that bill. And that's a real thing. And I can imagine that's where some of that behavioral finance comes in. But imagine if, like Darren, we were able to sit around and just experience it as a unit. And hey, we open these and we take care of them, right? We get it handled. So that's a good one and a great one to see. And then Mary mentioned just getting that piggy bank, that Mickey Mouse house piggy bank, and just the satisfaction of filling it up. I know that had to feel good. Like, once you start to see it, like, that's how savings is built, right? Like that excitement around saving money. But then I'm seeing some other ones show up that aren't as nice, right? Like, we've all experienced money in so many ways. I'll tell you one of my early ones, Mary Liz, since you mentioned it. One of the ones that I remember most, my mom was an entrepreneur, and she ran a child care center, an in-home child care center most of my childhood life. And I remember her sitting down and writing out her ledger on a Friday when it was the day to get paid. And she was writing out receipts for the customers, and she was giving them out. And then she had her ledger of all that she made that week, and she showed it to me. And I was just like, wow, Mom. Are we rich? Are we rich? I didn't know how much money was a lot or a little, but I was just like, does this mean that we're rich? Because I'm seeing money come in. And I was just like, that's pretty cool to see, right? Like, so that was like one of the first memories that I had, was her sitting at the table, writing it out and just saying, look here, son, and showing me what she was doing. And it was just really cool to be a part of that experience.
And I know we got some men in the audience, but a lot of times women and mothers are some of the real strong financial first role models that most kids have, is seeing like a variety of things, either as owners or coupon clippers, or ways to like go to the bank. Like, a lot of things that we observe from women are really important things, but unfortunately sometimes we're also ignored in the financial industry, and that's that's part of the challenges too.
That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up too. Yeah, like you said, a lot of us have, first money memories with my mom, right? And her managing a book. But so like you said, we hear about it a lot, but then that industry as a whole, it's very much still a male-dominated industry. We seeing a lot of great changes, but overall, you always, you think Wall Street, every previous movie about Wall Street, it's all men kind of standing around the ticker, right? So, just thinking about this, when we talk about finances and those conversations, do you think that it's an easier conversation when someone's finances are in order versus when there may be some financial issues? Does that change the conversation or make it easier or harder?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. The first thing I would say is that beware of appearances. Sometimes people say that their finances are in order when actually there's actually a lot of debt or other things that are happening, because watch TikTok, watch, lifestyle creep, like it's really easy to spend money and also to have this appearance like I got everything together, and yet they don't. But what I would say is that there's always a power dynamic at play when it comes to money. Like, some of it's also probably what your audience is looking for. It's like, even approaching it, does that mean that I think I have all the answers, or like I'm going to be there to judge you? For me and my own family, we have different ways to look at money. And I think sometimes labels happen quickly. So it's like, are you the one that's a spender or the saver? Are you the one that's, always wasteful, or the one that's always, afraid to spend money? So I think, to me, just talking about money, no matter if they're good or bad situations, it helps you get a healthier relationship. So sometimes it may not be easy when folks seem like they have it all together, because it's like a house of cards. But what is always easier, whether or not somebody's doing well or not, is using these conversations as an opportunity to talk about goals and priorities. Like, money is a tool that helps you can build the life that you really want. So if it's not working out well now, and you have someone else to talk to that might give you some inspiration, you can change that power dynamic.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I like that you pointed out the idea of the appearances, right? I remember a mentor of mine when I was going through the financial planning program. One of the things that he said is he would say, in a lot of cases, when a family, when the children think that they may have a large inheritance coming, then in a lot of cases they end up getting nothing. And it's a lot of the families where the child's thinking, oh, my parents may not have saved much. We weren't, we didn't seem like, appearance wise, like we had a lot. They end up getting a larger payday than they expect. Because, in those cases, what's happening is, it's the appearance, right? It's, oh, my parents, they're saving a lot. They have a lot because I can see a lot. But a lot of times when you can see it physically, that means that the money was spent, right, as opposed to kept. So that's one of those things that we found a lot when taking an estate planning classes, that the conversation was about people expecting a ton and it not being there versus the other way around. And just to your other point with those conversations, even when someone has a lot of money, or if the thought is that, my finances may be in order, those conversations don't become easier because it's just a different type of conversation, right? It may not make it easier, or it may not make it harder. It's just a different form of a discussion. So, we're now, we may have to talk about who's splitting what, or how the money's going to be broken up, as opposed to simply, how can we cover these bills next month, right? But that's just as difficult of a conversation at times as to how we split it up as any other conversation. So those are some good points. Now, so what are some tips that you suggest on how to approach a difficult money conversation with a loved one?
Yeah, this I think gets to some of the meat of it, and I know you'll have some other ideas to offer to it. But the first thing I like to say to folks is, check your intentions first. If you think you want to start this conversation because you're going to save somebody, or you're about ready to sort of get things off your chest about how you feel about it, that conversation is not going to go well. It was going to be difficult to begin with, and it's going to get worse. So check your intentions. Like, I think approaching it with empathy and listening. Listening is just as important as talking, sometimes even more important than talking, especially if it's a difficult conversation. Be mindful of the other person and showing empathy, but not sympathy, which I think it's like not feeling like, oh, thanks. I know you think I'm doing terrible, and this is why you want to have a conversation with me. Like, really be empathetic and walk in their shoes. And the last two things I would say that are really important: schedule the time to have the conversation, like prepare the person. Because sometimes just being like surprising them and saying, I want to have a difficult money conversation with you, like late at night or when they're in a moment of crisis, it's probably not going to be well received. And more than likely, it's not going to go the way you want to. Give them some time to prepare. Say, I really want to talk with you. Maybe we can like get it over coffee. I just want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that, that I want to hear from you, like how you're feeling about X. And maybe there'll be some things we can discuss together, or maybe brainstorm together, on some things. Make them feel like they're not the ones that are in trouble, and that you've got some kind of attitude about that. And, just again, it all depends on the relationship. So it's a little different if it's a partner or a child or a grandchild. Like, just knowing what your relationship is today, check those intentions, be really transparent, and always be supportive.
Those are good. And I just want to add this visual, because this is a good this adds some additional context to kind of what we're talking about. And just in those tips on approaching the conversation and being open to it. Like I really like what you said about your intentions, right? It's like, and that's what kind of where we open up is like reflecting on what do I really want out of this conversation. Like you say, when you walk in just trying to save someone, or you're like, hey, I'm here because I know it, and I know it and you don't, or I'm gonna make sure that you understand what you need to get things in order. That's a difficult place to to approach a conversation from. And it may not be received well, right? It's gonna be that's a tough one to even for someone to receive. So I really like that as a starter, right? It's like make sure that you're coming into it with the right motives and with the right mindset, because even though two things can be right at the same time. You can be completely right about needing to have the conversation or needing to intervene, but also kind of not showing up with the right intentions or with in the right way of managing that conversation, which can then be dangerous and cause someone to shut down or avoid or to be defensive. And then what could have been a great conversation has now become, an argument or a frustrating conversation for both people when that what you would have been able to provide may have been really good. And I'd love to hear from some folks in the chat. Like if you have some other tips, some of the things that have worked well for you and your family when it came to those difficult conversations, please let us know. What have you done? What do you consistently do? Because we know that there's so much for us to all learn about this. So feel free to add any information. And the other thing I'll mention, Mary Liz, is on this topic is just, and this is one that I've learned when you're having a conversation with, let's say, multiple children, just kind of being open and having the conversation with everyone and stating your true intentions. It's like I've heard some really good ones when it comes to estate planning. It's like, hey, if we're gonna, if we're splitting the money up a certain way, talk to all the children about it, because they also may have some ideas about how things could be done or what they suggest. And just being open to kind of hearing everybody across the board can be really helpful, because you don't want, especially when it comes to like your legacy, right? You don't want some things unsaid over time that could kind of make you that could be misinterpreted about your legacy. So that's an important one to do as well. Now let's talk about some of the fun things that we could do. Some of the fun ways to incorporate finances with like grandchildren and children. So like how can we educate like our grandchildren or even still our children in ways that may be beneficial, but also doesn't feel so much like a lesson. We don't always want to be taught, right? Especially like your grandchildren. They leave school. Sometimes they don't want to be taught more about anything, right? They've had to hear so much. So what are some fun ways to like incorporate money with our grandchildren?
Yeah, I love this because you're right, Martin. Like nobody likes to be felt like they're being taught and told something, and again, that's kind of financial planners in the past used to try to do that too. It doesn't really work. And I think for kids, they take their cues from the adults in their lives, so like I said, it's a money journey. So as you're learning things, there's things that you can impart to your kids and to your grandkids. Some things I've seen that work really well is, going to the bank. And I know banks are kind of all changing in terms of like online banking versus the physical bank. But, setting up an account, like showing them like what it means to be saving money and making it kind of a real thing that the bank, like what does the bank do? What happens at the bank? Ways to kind of get them excited about kind of that industry and like knowing it's a safe place to be able to save some of your money and what you've done for it. And today, everybody's doing things online. So what I would say is there's a lot of online games and things that are out there that some people do some great things about saving, budgeting. Maybe there's ways that your kids have gotten some checks from you for like their birthday or things without it. Set up some kind of like little banks, or I've seen jars or things. Some of it's about saving. Some of it's about spending and asking them about like what their goals are and watching that money grow that they save. And sometimes it's also about donating, and giving money back. And a lot of folks who take their kids to church or have other causes in a community, letting them put the money into the basket. Like that's always kind of a big thing at my church, is like showing the kids, like doing those things and showing that it's really important to give back. And then for me, I would say Amazon, and I'm saying it, but my niece, great niece, She loaded up a cart one day. Her mom's card was, on the cart, put in all these things she said she wanted, got to it, and her mom's card had expired. So thankfully she wasn't able to make the transactions. But what's fun for kids is that nowadays, where are they spending money? How are they spending money? On games, video games, and other things? Showing them how easy it is to spend money, but also like some of those things that are really important to them to know that that money comes from somewhere. So it's like
Yeah.
showing them how it's easy, and then also what's the impact for them. I mean, Martin, you probably have some good tips too.
Thanks. No, I appreciate those. And I mean, I'm just thinking of one. I remember talking to my nephew, and one day so he goes to school in a really nice area, lots of big houses around his school, but he lives on the other side of town, right? So it takes a little while to drive to and from school. But when he's at school, I'll pick him up sometimes and he'll say things to me like, I wish my mom would just buy a house in this neighborhood. And I think conceptually for him, he's just like, why don't we just live over here, these big old houses, right? And because that's how he just thinks that it can happen for anybody. So he's like, I wish we just buy a house over here. Because then, and in his mind, I can play with my friends later. And because this is what's working in his head, right? I can then walk home, I can play with my friends later. I can live right by my school and just do all these things. And I won't really have a time that I have to go home. So, and I realized he said this to me multiple times when picking him up. So I started thinking like, so in his mind, he doesn't have a concept that these homes cost millions of dollars where he goes to school. So what I asked him, I said, would you rather live in a house in this neighborhood, but maybe not be able to, have some of the games that you have and the shoes that you have and the clothes and things that you have? Or would you rather live where you live and have to drive a little further to school, but you know that you can buy some of the other fun things that you have? And what I was trying to get him to see is like, hey, there are choices that you make, right? You don't get to have it all, right? So you may not be able to get the same shoes, the same clothes that you just ask for regularly. You may not be able to order food as much as you want to, but you get to live in close proximity, which is going to be pretty expensive. And he sat and he thought for a second, and then he said, I'd rather live further away and be able to get my games and my shoes. So I said, and so in my mind, I'm like, and all I said was, hey, so now you see what you value. At this moment, what would be more important to you? And those are the decisions we have to make as adults, right? But like children don't even think about that stuff. It's just like, hey, move me here, but also buy me everything I want. And let's do all the things that we want to do. And so I was, and the idea was to just get him to think about, hey, you don't get it all. Sometimes you got to commute, not be right by your school, but you get some of the other things as a trade-off because you live in an area that's a little more affordable. So, things like that. That's where it's like day to day, just in conversation. And he's 11, right? So it's like, did the lesson stick as hard as it could have? Maybe, maybe not, but it's like a good way to just engage in dialogue to get him thinking about the way that things work for him, right? So those are some of the
Absolutely.
things. Those are some of the things I like to do with children. I've also seen like simulations for like young children. Um for really young children, just kind of giving them like a simulation of a market and giving them money and allowing them to decide, what do I buy versus how much I keep, and asking them, what do what do you want to do? Do you want to save some? Do you want to spend it all? Or do you want to give some to charity? And just get them to think about some of these different things. It could be a marketplace, and then it could be a charity bucket and a bunch of little gadgets that they may want to buy, but then also this idea of keeping some money. So I've done this with a group of, it was about 5 young children. They were between 3 and 6. And you could almost immediately see who wanted to save their money, who wanted to spend it, who wanted to give some to charity, or even give some to their friends, right? And it's like you're just seeing little money dynamics play out in as in real time for these young children. But it's like, it's fun to do those types of things so that you can just see how they operate and how they think about money. And I see in the chat, someone mentioned that like, it's a game called Payday, really fun and educational game for young children, for children. So that's awesome to hear. And I'm seeing some good questions coming in, so please keep those coming in. All right, so that's good to know. And then let's talk. So while we're on the idea of like lessons, education, what about some tips for making money conversations easier? How do we
I think we
ease
talked
that?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about it, but a couple more to get into more of the difficult things. I know that's what some folks probably want to hear about. But to make it easier, first of all, make it a habit. It's not meant to be just only a one and done. So start to really think about incorporating ways to talk about money and the things that you're dealing with in a more regular basis. And I think for your, for your nephew, for your folks who've talked about Martin, it's about celebrating also some of the good things that folks are doing, not only feeling like it's that kind of lesson or things to learn about. And make sure you know that a conversation, it's a two-way street. Not everybody has all the answers, and it needs to be a safe space too. Money needs to feel, those money conversations need to feel non-judgmental. And it's so hard to check your tone sometimes, but the tone and the words we use need to be based on curiosity. Like you're always learning about money, like talk about your goals, try to really make them as fun as they can be. I know there's sometimes when they are going to be difficult, and we're going to go into a couple of those things as well.
Yep, yep. And so what are some of the conversations we should be having now? Like we think about inflation's high and the market's a little tricky. Like what are some of those conversations that are for right now?
Yeah, there are so many things. I mean, money, as you know, is just so large. I think for some of the things we need to be talking about now is about the everyday expenses. A lot of people are living more on credit cards today. They're just basically not able to afford everyday gas, food, housing, other things. Some of the conversation is like those extras just really may not be possible right now. So some of the conversations to have are, what's possible? What are some of our goals on like a 6-month or a yearly basis? If we're planning on vacation, like how is everyone helping to contribute in some way? Maybe somebody's doing extra chores. Maybe somebody else is getting a summer job, like depending on, it's about family finances. It's not just only on the parents or the grandparents. And I think having those conversations around debt is really important. Student loans are higher than ever these days. There's just a lot of things that are going on, yet thinking about ways to save for today and also save for your future, depending on the age of your kids. If they've got jobs as young 20s, they should be putting some money away for retirement, and knowing that like using that time over time to compound those values is really important. So it depends on the life stage of where you are, depends on the relationship you have, but money is everywhere. So, think about those real goals and the things where you feel like you want more people to engage with you and have those more regular conversations.
Those are really good. I like that. I like that. And I like the idea of just planning as a unit, like working together and having family financial planning as opposed, because we all have to work together, right? And with that in mind, like how do we set some appropriate boundaries with our children? So, we have, in some cases, if we're retired, we have a nest egg that we have to manage, right? We have finite funds to some extent. But then there's, the financial obligations to our families and things like that. How do we kind of set those appropriate boundaries or even think about those conversations so that we can manage our nest egg appropriately?
That's a great question. I see you've got the slide up here with the stat that we've talked about. I like Bobbi Rebell. She has this book called Launching Financial Grownups. It's actually a very good book. And I encourage folks, if they're interested in reading articles and books and things, that's one to maybe add to your list. But she's got in there this quote that a parent-child relationship is a financial relationship, which I think is really interesting because you don't always think of it that way. But for those who have kids, you're saying, yeah, that's definitely a parent. And I love this quote's a little scary. Nearly half of parents with a child age 18 and older are providing financial support, which makes sense if they're in school and whatever. But even those like adult kids in their 20s, on average, these parents are spending more than $1,400 a month to help their children make ends meet. Now, that's a lot of money. I did see a question in the chat. It's called Launching Financial Grownups, and her name is Bobbi Rebell. And I'm happy to put that in the chat afterwards as well, or to send it to Joyce and team so that they can, Atisha, she's got that. And it's pretty amazing when you think about $1,400 a month, because if you're living on Social Security, that's almost your whole check. So you've got healthcare, you're taking care of healthcare until age 26. For folks in their 20s, they've got cell phones, student loans, housing, utilities, food. So the ways to kind of set some of those boundaries is, again, having those conversations earlier rather than later. So let's say, I know Martin has talked about, like, we're in graduation season, right? And grandparents are being asked to assist with grandchildren for the summer. And sometimes that means, like, that's going to be costing more money. It's more in food, more in gas, more in other things. Talk about the roles and expectations that people have in terms of how much are you providing, how much is being provided, to be really clear up front. Like, maybe you can help a little bit more out during the summer or in key moments, but you can't take a loan out for retirement. So don't make sure that you're not, basically taking money out, loans from your retirement savings in order to pay for things that you can't afford, because you can't say no. And I know saying no is hard, but one way that one of my other good friends, and also Martin's too, Lynette Calfani Cox, she's a great she's a great money budget coach. She's called the Money Coach. And she has talked about no, a simple no can suffice. When somebody asks, like, can you do this for me? Well, I can't. And they say, well, then maybe that's going to impact my relationship. You can say, I'm not trying to hurt you at all, but I have to establish some financial boundaries. And here's basically what I can do. I can maybe help with pickup, or I can do these things, but I can't afford to be able to pay for all the summer camps, or I can't afford to be able to do these things. Let's figure out a budget together. Let's figure out those things together. I think kind of recapping it is just don't make assumptions on either side. Just because you're the grandparent retired doesn't mean that you've got more money. You may be on more of a fixed income than your child. And beware of that guilt monster. It plays a huge role. You want to be a good grandparent, don't you? Like, don't you love your child? And they don't mean it in that way often, but because money is so stressful and they don't really know, where else to turn, there's these assumptions that are made. And so break that down, have those conversations, ask questions, and do it with the best of intentions to see what might be possible.
That's I really like that as a great kind of wrap up of the way to have the conversations, things to be aware of, and such. So I want to we have some time for Q&A, and I want to make sure that we get to some of these questions, because I see some good ones in the chat. So let me turn it over to Jacqueline. Jacqueline, I see you're back with us, and Joyce.
I'm back. Is it my turn? Okay, I'm ready. So I'm going to start off with one that was asked a long time ago, but it hasn't necessarily have to do with the children, but it says, my husband and I have long communicated that we're going to leave a bulk of my financial assets we have remaining in our death, several charitable organizations. And she says, we are trying to cultivate that perspective in our Now, what tips do you have to continue this important conversation, and how can we grow this attitude?
Well, Martin, I'll take a couple things and then maybe you kind of add on to some of this. I think right before the call came on, we were talking about how sometimes when kids may not have been involved at all in the process of, like, what it meant to kind of put your will together, or your estate together, or things, they're making assumptions about what might be happening, and then sometimes they get disappointed if the parents have decided to do something else with all their assets, which they have every right to do. The first thing I would say is that you got to communicate. You got to be able to say, be willing to say with your kids, maybe even depending on their ages, sharing with them a copy of the will to basically say, or like how they've made the plan, like, this is what we're planning. This is why we're planning it. Like, we want to make sure that you're able to take care of yourself, to be financially independent. And that's why some of the decisions that we're making, which sometimes seem kind of tough, are actually because we want to make sure we're leaving the world in a better place than we found it. Like, the things that we've gotten have been because of the grace of God, or because of the hard work, all those different reasons why you have it. And we really encourage that maybe you want to plan with us about what kind of legacy do we want to leave behind. And it's not only about financial assets, it's also about what you do with that money. And so sharing with people, like sharing with your family, it does become an important conversation to have.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I'll just add is just so engage, like you said, how do we foster that attitude? Engage the children and grandchildren in the types of places where you want to distribute your money, or where you want to share your gift. If it's the Humane Society, right? then let's get the children volunteering with animals and with thinking about, it's you're like whatever cause that you're excited about and that you want to continue to fund the great work that's being done in that space. Make sure that your children and grandchildren are serving in that ways in somehow. A great idea is, let's say it's the holidays, and instead of just simply sharing gifts or going out to listen to caroling and taking advantage of some of the holiday festivities, add a volunteer component to the holidays every year. So every year as a group, we may go out and look at we go look at the lights. But before we go look at the lights, we go and volunteer and we feed the homeless, as a group. And we do it with some of our favorite charities so that they can see and engage and connect to the same places where you plan on providing your gifts later in life. And especially, with the grandchildren, if you start them young, that's going to be an exciting way for them to get engaged.
Great. Thank you, Martin and Mary. Here's one that's going to segue to what you both were just talking about. A person had said, we have attempted to drive the concept of savings with our grandchildren. But here's the thing. They've already started a fund for each of their grandchildren for a retirement fund. Now they're starting a retirement fund for their grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And they want to retire like 18 years. But then they said if they retire at 18 or time to graduate from high school or buy a car. So using this concept, they're putting in 20% of everything that they're savings into the account, understanding that those savings cannot be withdrawn until retirement or when they're 18. Woo. So would you please provide some incentives to long-term caring or sharing, just something to let the kids know their grandkids are putting all of this money in, but they can't touch it until they're 18. What are both of your comments on that, please?
You want to try that one first, Martin?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I've seen people do is open up retirement accounts for their children. But one of the things that they'll consistently do is sit down with the child and show them how the money's being invested, how it's growing, and allowing the child to then kind of get engaged and ask more questions. So if you're putting away money for the children, but if they're not seeing it and engaging with it now, then they may not grasp this concept of like, oh, look at how money grows over time. Look at how much money I have, right? I've seen someone do this with a 6-year-old, and the 6-year-old was just like, am I getting rich? And it's just like, but they're taking on this idea that like, I got money growing and I didn't do anything yet. So they get excited about seeing their money grow as opposed to it going down, right? Or just spending it. So it's a new way to just engage them with their finances. So I'd encourage that listener that if you are growing that money, take those statements out. And this could be one of those fun conversations or fun things to do is every maybe, monthly or quarterly, when you get a statement, show them like, hey, this is for you. This is growing. You can grow this as long as you can. And this is what it's going to be if you don't stop growing it. Right. So that they're just engaging and getting excited about it. And you have a cool bonding place with your grandchildren.
And I would just say that's great, Martin. I think also though, so first of all, those are wonderful people who are doing that for their kids and grandkids. So first of all, let's just like give praise to where it's due. The challenge is though that what we find is that kids often make different choices with their own money than they would with someone else's. So just because they've got this money that's growing, that's one of the buckets. Remember, like one of those things we talked about. So they've got that pot. That's great, but they should actually also be encouraged to understand the value of their own money. And encouraging them to actually save for the things that they want before they're age 18, like this is what you do, this is how you save your money. And so if they really want that skateboard or the, motorized, bicycle or something, they've got to be able to save themselves. They will learn what delayed gratification and trade-offs are all about. And so it's the same kind of habits. The grandparents and parents are doing one thing, but the kids got to get engaged with their own money and figure out how they can do it. It's a great role model, but you need both, I would say.
That's good. And that's a good bridge. That's a good bridge.
That's good. That's good. Because you're talking about grandkids, you're talking about young kids, and you're saying all of this money, great statements, but I can't touch it until I'm 18. They want candy now. They don't want to wait.
And they can save for it. So yeah.
Here's another quick question. This person says, I have a hard time understanding the money values of the generation of my grown children who are in their early 40s. but I'm 70 years old. So she's asking, did the concept about money change, or did my children's change, or what's going on?
So let me say a couple things about that, to be honest. Okay, first of all, they're not wrong in terms of how money has changed. It used to be that you worked 30 years for a company, you got a pension, you got like you got healthcare provided for some people who are in my parents' generation and their grandparents' generation. And we've seen now, if you can't getting a pension is like finding that lucky penny with a 4-leaf clover. So it's all on them. Like the people in their 40s and 50s, and even now younger too, it is all on them, which is why you're seeing like young people have 3 or 4 businesses or thinking about ways to like maximize their funding. Because when they come to the end of their career, which could be now till they're 70, 80, beyond, they feel like there's always ways for people to be able to make money, and yet they've got to take care of themselves. So part of it is a little bit of that kind of attitude of like, yeah, like I'm having to do all these things. And I don't have that safety net at the end like I used to. And so there is a bit of that kind of changing in mindset that's going on. And also, I would say COVID has changed a lot. I mean, the last few years, a lot of people saw their businesses go under, people pass away, health conditions happen. That has to play with our psyches. It's like some people say, just live for today. I think I saw a quote. It's like, why is my son going to all these concerts? Like, I get it. But you know why? Because probably your son missed that live interaction of being with people that were like his age and celebrating something that felt so good. Like we are all still kind of recovering from that. And money has gotten harder. It's more expensive for everything that we're doing. I think that's what we're kind of butting up against. It's like, you're not making as much as inflation is telling us, and you don't have that safety net at the end. You're having a lot more stress. And that's why you're seeing credit card debt and everything else going up. So a little grace, but also to understand that money has changed for people. Martin, anything else to add?
No, I think you're spot on. And I think, well, the one thing I'll just say is we're even seeing the way that people make money change so fast, right? Like with the gig economy, we do it, and we just talked about the gig economy not long ago, but people are able to cash out and make money faster, right? I can drive today, get paid $110 today and cash it out immediately to take care of my needs, as opposed to waiting on my 2-week paycheck, right? So we're seeing things happen in just a different way, and the dynamics are all changing. And we just, we have to adjust in some ways, but then continue to stick, explain some of those foundational values. The conversations about, saving and having a nest egg, that matters if you're getting paid every day or if you're getting paid once a month, right? Like you still have to save something and you still have to have some values around it. So yes, it's the dynamics are different, but our core values in a lot of ways are still similar. We just have to work with the new way of how money is being handled and managed.
Wow. Thank you so very much. Those are great answers. Now, this question is a little sticky, so get ready. It says, regarding estate planning, is it possible to set up so that each child can receive 50% of the estate, but one child can control the spending of the money because the other one is irresponsible? Wow. What are the other suggestions for the cases where one child is very responsible and the other child is reckless? What do you think, group?
So I'll give one example of this without saying who it's related to. Folks who are watching the webinar later. Or one of my tips that we didn't get to with Martin was that when if people are having difficult conversations or find one of their family members they're difficult, don't talk about it at the picnic. I mean, don't share like cousin Charlie's having problems, or like cousin Charlie is, we got some problems. So it's really important that some of these things are meant to be within the family, and kind of really keeping that safe space. One example is that, first of all, I don't think Martin and I can give you exact advice on that. You definitely should consult an estate attorney to make sure you're setting up things correctly, that you've got the kind of ways that your wishes from a legal perspective are set up in the right way, and that you know how those are administered. But there's been a situation where there were 2 children, one of whom was extremely responsible and was kind of like the parents, kind of golden child, kind of person. And the other one just spent an awful lot of money, had some addiction issues and some other things that were going on. And so the family had asked that one child who was like the golden one, will you just basically, we're going to leave it where you're going to basically be doling out the money on a regular basis to, once we pass to this person. And the golden child was like, our relationship already is not that great between the two siblings. And having that kind of be sort of that monitor was not going to work very well for them. So it was still 50-50 split at the end. Both parents passed away. And what happened is it went into this like a trust fund. There are trust companies who basically can be the ones who divide out the money, who have it like on a regular schedule. And it's not then incumbent upon the other child to be involved at all. Like it's just basically you were able to set it up where one child could receive some of the money and the other one is part of a trust in the pieces of that. So there are a lot of ways that can happen. And again, without knowing the situation, there's no specific advice to give, but there are options.
Oh, that's a great answer. Martin, do you have anything to add to that one before I send it back over to Jacqueline?
That's a great answer. I just want to mention one resource in the chat, and I just put it in the chat. It's a book. It's called Beyond the Grave. Oh, I actually spelled grave wrong. Beyond the Grave by Jeffrey Condon. He's an estate planning lawyer, and he breaks down every case that he's gone through and the types of things that he's seen. Ones like this, he gives all types of special clauses and things that you can put into a trust or will so that you can manage any of these situations in a way that's helpful. And it's a lot of storytelling. So it's a really engaging book.
All right, thank you so much. There are several more questions, but time is remiss right now. So Jacqueline, take it away.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Martin and Mary Liz. The information you shared has been tremendous. And I know there must be a zillion more questions. So let's go over to the chat. Sorry. But before we close out, we'd like to take a quick pulse on what you've learned. Put it in the chat. What did you learn from today's presentation? So just give us some quick answers. Joyce, what are folks saying?
I'm not seeing anything yet, but I'm sure it should be coming. Right now, somebody's just asking, will we have access to the recording? And I'm sure we will. So later on.